My name is Margaret. I am 78 years old. And tonight, for the first time in my long life, I will tell you the truth about what it means to give your soul to someone who later spits it back at you. I had always believed that love, true, unconditional love, could heal every wound. I believed it when I married young, when I raised my only son, and even when fate tore him from me in a cruel accident I will never forget. It was love that kept me breathing when I buried my child, and it was love that made me open my arms to his son, my grandson, the only piece of my boy left in this world. But love, I have learned, can be a dangerous lie when it is not returned. My grandson became my reason to keep living. I stayed awake through the nights when he was sick. I skipped meals to make sure he had enough to eat. I worked my fingers until they bled just to put shoes on his growing feet. For years, I thought he saw me as the strong, steady anchor he could depend on. But the truth was something I had ignored for too long. It started small, with little words thrown at me like careless pebbles. "You're old. You don't understand." Words that stung but that I told myself were just the foolish arrogance of youth. I let them pass. I stayed silent. Then the insults sharpened. He began to laugh at my hands when they shook, mock my slow steps when I climbed the stairs, roll his eyes when I asked him for help. He stopped thanking me for meals. He stopped asking me how I was. He stopped seeing me altogether. Still, I stayed silent. Because that is what mothers do. That is what grandmothers do. We bear the pain quietly, we swallow the hurt, we sacrifice without asking for recognition. But silence can be a slow, poisonous death. And mine was killing me. The breaking point came one night, a night I will never forget. I had cooked him his favorite meal, the same dish his father once loved. I waited for him at the table, my hands trembling with anticipation. He came in late, his phone in his hand, laughter in his voice. He looked at the food, sneered, and said words that cut me deeper than any knife ever could. "You're pathetic. You think I want this. You think your old ways matter to me. You should be grateful I even live here. Nobody cares about your sacrifices. Nobody cares." Those two words broke something inside me. I had given him everything, and in return, he saw me as nothing. But what he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that there was a secret I had carried for decades. A sacrifice that not even my closest friends knew about. A story of pain and love, of choices made in silence, choices that shaped his entire life. And as I sat there, shaking, staring at the boy I had raised, I realized something. If he could throw away all that I had done for him, then maybe it was time the world finally knew the truth. I would not stay silent forever. And when I decided to share my secret, everyone, neighbors, family, strangers, would finally see him for who he really was. Because sometimes, silence is not love. Sometimes, silence is the deadliest weapon of all. I was not born into wealth. Everything I ever had came from long nights of working in small shops, sewing until my eyes blurred, and cleaning homes where no one even learned my name. Yet I never complained, because my son, my only son, was the reason behind every blister on my hands. When he was taken from me in that brutal accident, my world ended in silence. I remember the hospital floor beneath me as I fell to my knees, unable to breathe, begging God to trade my life for his. But no one listened. Not the doctors, not heaven. And then they placed his boy, my grandson, into my arms. A child so small, his cry so weak, but his presence powerful enough to keep me from following my son into the grave. From that moment, I made a vow, I would give this boy every ounce of love left in me. At first, he gave that love back. He used to crawl into my bed when nightmares woke him, his little arms wrapping around my fragile waist. He used to run through the yard, shouting, "Grandma, look at me," as if my eyes were the only ones that mattered. He used to laugh when I baked cookies and covered my face with flour just to see him giggle. Those were the golden years. But life has a cruel way of showing cracks in even the strongest foundations. The first signs were subtle. He stopped holding my hand when we walked to the market. He began answering me with short words, sometimes none at all. I told myself it was just adolescence, that awkward distance every child builds as they grow. Then, the words came. "Why do you talk so slow? Your clothes look old." You don't get it. You're from another time. They were small daggers, thrown with careless laughter, but each one left its mark. I told myself not to take them seriously. But at night, when I sat alone with his empty dishes still warm on the table, I pressed those words against my chest like sharp glass. I began to see the way he looked at me, not with pride, not even with affection, but with irritation, as if my very presence weighed him down. And yet, I stayed silent. Because every sacrifice I had made for him was a secret no one else knew. He didn't know about the second job I took, the nights I went hungry so he could eat, the times I sold pieces of my life, my jewelry, my wedding ring, the very memories of my past, just so his future would be brighter. He didn't know because I never told him. I thought love did not need announcements. I thought love would reveal itself in time. But he grew colder. I remember one evening when he returned from school, angry and storming into his room. I knocked softly, asking if he wanted dinner. He opened the door just enough to look at me with eyes filled with shame, as if being seen with me was the worst thing that could happen to him. "Stop acting like you care," he snapped. "You don't understand anything." The door slammed. And I stood there, my hand still on the wood, feeling like I had just lost him all over again, just like I lost his father. I went to bed that night with my heart breaking, but my lips stayed sealed. Silence was my shield, my curse, and my choice. But deep inside, I felt the storm building. And the day was coming when I would no longer be able to hold it back. The day it finally broke me was not loud. It was not violent. It was ordinary, the kind of day you would never expect to shatter a life. I woke early, as I always did, my bones stiff but my heart stubborn. I prepared his favorite meal. Roast chicken, potatoes golden with butter, vegetables from the market I had walked to under the heavy sun. My hands ached, but I hummed while cooking, remembering the way his father once devoured the same meal with a grin that lit up my kitchen. I set the table. 2 plates, 2 glasses, a soft cloth laid across the wood. I even polished the forks until they shone, because somehow, it mattered to me that he felt cared for. When he finally arrived home, his laughter echoed through the hallway. Laughter not for me, but for whoever was on the phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice the table. He didn't notice my tired smile. He walked straight past, tossing his shoes carelessly, mumbling words I could not catch. "Dinner is ready," I said softly. He glanced at the food, then at me. And with a sneer that froze the blood in my veins, he said, "Do you really think I want this? Your food is disgusting. Everything you do is outdated. You should be grateful I even stay here. Nobody cares about your sacrifices. Nobody cares." The words rang in my ears like bells tolling a funeral. I stared at him, my body shaking. My hands clutched the edge of the table so tightly that the cloth nearly tore. He sat down across from me, scrolling on his phone, his face lit by the cold glow of the screen. No gratitude, no warmth, no love. I wanted to scream. To shout at him that I had given up my life so he could have his. That every piece of comfort he enjoyed had been bought with my blood, sweat, and tears. Instead, I swallowed. My lips trembled, but no sound came out. Silence again. But inside, my heart was splitting open. The meal went untouched. He pushed his chair back with a groan, muttering about meeting his friends, about how he didn't want to waste the night sitting with some old woman. And then he left. Just like that. I sat there alone, staring at the empty plate across from me. The food had grown cold. The candle I lit had burned low. And in that silence, I felt smaller than I had ever felt in my entire life. But it didn't end there. The betrayal deepened. He began to bring friends home, friends who laughed when they saw me, whispering cruel things about my wrinkled face, my shaky hands. I heard him joining their laughter. I heard him say, "She's nothing. Just some old woman who clings to me." Each word was a dagger. Each day became a war against my own breaking spirit. And yet, I said nothing. Until one night. I had gone to his room to leave clean clothes, folded neatly the way I always did. His door was slightly open. Inside, I heard his voice, low and bitter, speaking to someone on the phone. "She thinks she saved me. She thinks she matters. Truth is, she's the reason my life feels trapped." I can't wait until I'm out of this house. Then she'll see how useless she really is. I dropped the clothes. They scattered across the floor. I backed away before he saw me. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath ragged. I stumbled into my room, closed the door, and pressed my back against it, sliding down until I was on the floor. Tears ran down my face. My body shook. All these years. All the sacrifices. All the love. To him, I was nothing but a cage. That night, I opened the small locked box beneath my bed. My trembling hands lifted the lid, and I stared at the papers inside, the proof of what I had given up, the proof of what I had lost so that he could live. For decades, I had kept it hidden, thinking he would never need to know. But now, as my tears stained the papers, I realized something. It was time. If he could look me in the eye and tell the world I was useless, then the world would know the truth. They would know what I gave up for him. And when they did, he would never be able to hide again. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the dark with the papers spread across my bed, the ink blurred from my tears. These papers were not just words. They were my life's blood. Proof of the years I had clawed my way through poverty, debts, and hunger. Proof of the choices I made after my son died. Choices no one else ever knew. I had sacrificed more than anyone could imagine. And I had stayed silent because I thought love would be enough. But love had failed me. So I began to plan. At first, doubt ate at me. Could I really do this? Could I really expose the truth to the world, knowing it would shatter my grandson's carefully built image? For years, I had protected him from shame, from gossip, from the harsh judgment of others. But now, I realized protecting him meant killing myself slowly, one insult at a time. I whispered to the empty room. He wanted me invisible. But I will make him unforgettable. The first step was gathering everything. The receipts, the letters, the documents that proved what I had given up. The money I sold my wedding ring for, the debts I carried on my back so he could have schooling, the proof that even the roof over his head had been bought by my sweat. I stacked it neatly, piece by piece, like weapons waiting to be used. The second step was deciding where and when. Revenge is not noise. True revenge is silence broken at the right moment. I didn't want to scream in his face. That would mean nothing. I wanted the world to hear. But where? Not in church. Not at some small gathering where whispers could be silenced. No. I needed a stage bigger than both of us. And then it came to me. The college ceremony. He had been boasting for weeks that he would be receiving an award. He wanted everyone to see him as the perfect grandson, the hard-working young man carrying the family's pride. He had even promised to mention me in his speech, but I knew it was just another lie. He wanted applause without telling the truth of how he got there. That would be the stage. I would not beg him to acknowledge me. I would show the world what he refused to say. Still, planning revenge is like holding fire. It burns even the one who controls it. There were moments when I hesitated. Moments when I heard his laughter echoing down the hall, reminding me of the little boy who once clung to my hand. But then the memory of his words, "You're useless, nobody cares," would return, and my resolve would harden again. I rehearsed in my head what I would say, how I would stand, how I would let the papers speak for themselves. My voice might tremble, but the truth would be unshakable. The days leading up to the ceremony were long. He mocked me still, rolling his eyes at my silence, throwing his dirty clothes at me as if I were nothing but a maid. He thought my quiet was weakness. He had no idea it was preparation. On the morning of the event, I dressed slowly. Not in anything new, those days had long passed, but in my best, the same dress I wore when I buried my son. Because in many ways, this day was another funeral. The funeral of my silence. I looked at myself in the mirror. The wrinkles, the tired eyes, the trembling hands. I whispered, "They will not see weakness. They will see truth." And then, I hid the papers in my bag, close to my chest. My secret sacrifice. My weapon. My revenge. The auditorium smelled of Polish and coffee. Lights hung like small suns over the crowd. Students in bright gowns chatted with proud faces. Parents wiped eyes. The air hummed with expectation. He stood on stage smiling like he owned the room. He had practiced that smile. He had practiced those polite words meant to charm strangers. He had practiced pretending to be the grateful grandson. I sat near the back. My hands held the small bag with the papers inside. My fingers felt nothing. My heart beat with a steady cold rhythm. I had rehearsed every sentence in the quiet of my kitchen. I had counted the breaths between words. I had planned this so the truth would land like a hammer. When his name was called, the room rose in applause. He walked forward. He thanked the dean. He looked toward the crowd and mouthed the expected line about family support. That was his cue. That was the moment he had imagined would make him untouchable. I stood up. No one expected me to move. Old women are supposed to be invisible. Old women are supposed to sit quietly. He had counted on that. He had planned his speech around my silence. I stepped into the aisle. My shoes made soft sounds on the carpet. I felt every eye turn to me. I felt the heat of 100 gazes. I walked toward the stage slowly. My knees trembled, but my voice did not. I climbed the steps and reached the microphone. The light hit my face. The whispers swelled into a thin roar. He froze mid-smile. He had not planned for this. I began with my voice low and simple. I did not beg. I spoke facts. I spoke dates. I spoke numbers. I read aloud the receipts that showed the small life I had sold to pay for his shoes and his books. I read the letter where I had signed away a small parcel of land so he could attend school. I read the bank slips that proved each payment I had made for housing and fees while his name rose in community lists. The room shifted. The polite applause died. Faces went pale. Cameras popped up. Phones recorded. He reached for the mic. He whispered that this was a mistake. He told lies. He said he did not know. He said he had been told one story as a child and that story had been different. I held up the small worn piece of paper. I told them the truth about the ring I had sold so he could take an exam. I told them about the nights I skipped bread so he could eat. I told them about the work I did that left scars on my hands and proof of payments in every line. He began to sputter. He looked small and frantic. Friends in the front row avoided his gaze. The dean stood motionless. The audience leaned forward as if to catch every drop of the truth I was spilling. He lunged toward me. He tried to grab the papers. He waved his hands. He called me names. He shouted that I was making up stories. He said this was an act of cruelty. For the first time in my life I spoke loud. I called him by the word he had used the night he left my dinner untouched. I said it where everyone could hear. I told them how his laughter had hollowed me. I told them of the nights I had cried and still folded his shirts the next morning. He turned bright red. He stammered. A video of his face appeared on a dozen glowing screens. Conversations erupted like a storm. Students traded whispers. A woman in the second row began to cry softly. A young man who had once praised my grandson on social media shoved his phone into his pocket and left. At that moment I felt my whole life compress into a single clear beam. The sound of my own speech surprised me. The words were not cruel. They were true. And truth has a weight that cannot be shrugged off. He tried to run. He pushed past his friends. He stumbled down the aisle. I watched him go. He did not look back. Cameras followed him. The streaming feed continued. People around me stood stunned. Some clapped hesitantly and then stopped. Some murmured about justice. Some whispered about betrayal. The weeks that followed unfolded like a string of small violent events. The video of his face when I read the papers moved like wildfire. Strangers sent messages. Former employers called the college to ask questions. His internship was placed under review. Old friends stopped answering calls. The woman he had been careful to impress unfollowed him on every platform. I did not dance when the messages came. I did not celebrate. I watched them come and felt only a deep exhausted satisfaction that the world now held the same proof I had held so long under my mattress. He came to the house the night after the ceremony. He stood at the gate and knocked hard. He shouted his apologies through the door. He promised to explain everything if I would only open. I did not answer. He left a bag on the porch. The bag contained letters begging forgiveness. It contained a small bouquet eaten at the edges by indifference. He tried to make restitution in public. He posted a long message that said he was sorry and blamed his youth and stress and influence. People read it and decided whether to believe. Some believed. Some did not. I learned that exposing a truth does not fix everything. It does not rebuild trust. It does not erase years of harm. But it lifts a weight from the chest of the person who has been hiding a life. Outside of town, men and women who had once nodded in greeting looked the other way. Neighbors cancelled favors. His scholarship committee asked for more documentation. The dean, who had once smiled when he walked through the hallways, called me for a private meeting. He was quiet and careful. He said the college would look into the payments and awards. He said that integrity matters. I watched as small doors closed behind him. Doors that once opened at a word or a wink. I watched his world shrink into a narrow path of apologies and explanations. I watched the people who had applauded him when he wore his mask remove their support. It was not instant. Retribution rarely is. But it was steady and certain and colder than I ever wanted it to be. People came to me with questions. They wanted to know why I had hidden the truth for so long. I told them why. I told them that my silence had been love. I told them that love can be foolish and cruel. I told them that generations can build a lie together by simply refusing to speak. A journalist knocked on my door 2 weeks later. He asked for an interview. He asked if I had more to say. I thought about the papers still in my bag. I thought about the nights of sacrifice. I thought about the empty meals and the stitches that had come undone when I sewed late into the night. I opened the bag. I handed him a few more documents. He left with a promise to write the story without embellishment. He left with the photograph of the old ring I had worn on my finger for years. The article ran on the front page of a small regional paper and then on a larger site. People commented. People argued. But the record was there. The proof could not be erased by polite denials. He called me every day for a while. He apologized and then begged and then threatened and then begged again. He tried to drag me into the same petty games he had used for years. I refused every call. I let them pile on my machine and then I deleted them. My neighbors started to treat me differently. The young woman who had once delivered packages brought me a pie and stayed to talk. The man who owned the grocery store left a bag of sugar at my door with a note of quiet kindness. Some eyes were softer. Some heads bowed. People apologized without saying it. That was enough. Weeks later he came to the gate again. This time he did not knock. He left a box. Inside were the shoes he had ruined with mud that I had washed for him. Inside were invoices and letters and a thin apology on paper that smelled of cheap perfume. I tore the note into small pieces and fed them to the bird that nested in my fence. It chewed them and shook its head and then flew away. There was a final hearing of some kind at the college. They wanted a meeting with me and with him. He sent a representative. He did not come in person. He stayed away as if shame could be hidden behind absence. The committee requested clarifications and receipts. They wanted to know why the payments had been made and who had benefited. I answered every question with the same steady voice I had used on the stage. When it was over, I walked out into bright sunlight and felt it warm my face. The world had shifted. Not everyone cheered. Not everyone forgave. Not everyone believed every detail. But the record was there. The truth had been placed where it could not vanish under polite smiles. I thought revenge would make me feel lighter. It did in a small way. I felt less hollow on the nights when memory would gnaw at me. I felt less like a ghost living in my own home. But I also felt the weight of what I had done. To expose a truth is also to destroy illusions. I had destroyed the illusion that he was a hero. I had destroyed the image he had carefully curated. There were costs. Reputation is a currency different from money. It buys you small comforts and simple doors. I had taken those comforts from him. I had closed those doors. I had made him face himself under the bright public lights he had once adored. 1 month after the ceremony, he was walking down a street I often used. He passed by without recognizing me. He looked older. He looked smaller. People muttered. A woman I had never met crossed the street to spit a short bitter word in his direction and then walked on. He turned his face away and hurried on. That night I sat by my window and placed the small empty box on the table. The box had held all my proofs. Now it sat like an altar to a life I had spent hiding and holding and finally exposing. I lit a lamp. I held my cup of tea until it warmed my hands. I thought about the boy who once ran into my arms. I thought about the man who had turned away. I do not know if he will ever forgive himself. I do not know if he will ever be whole. That is not my business any longer. My business was truth and survival. My business was to break the silence that had kept him safe and me small. Outside a car drove by. The radio played a song I had loved as a girl. I listened and felt something I had not felt in years. The ache of loss was still there. The memory of a son who would never return did not leave. But beneath that ache sat a thin, steady line of relief. The world had finally seen what I had always carried. The world had finally seen him. And when the lights went down on that small stage, a shadow moved across my heart. I thought I was finished. I thought the story had closed. But then the phone rang. A number I did not know flashed on the screen. I answered. A voice I had not expected said simply, "This will not be the end." I closed my eyes. The room was quiet. I folded my hands over the small empty box. I breathed in slowly and held the silence for a long time. The silence did not comfort me the way it once had. It hummed with a new meaning. It was not surrender. It was not defeat. It was the sound of a long secret finally released into the air. I placed the cup down. I stood and walked to the window. The streetlights blinked on. He had his life to rebuild. I had mine. But one thought stayed with me as I watched the night settle. Truth can be a beginning as well as an ending. And I was not yet finished.